Rome, 204 AD, appeared before its listeners in all its splendor, yet behind the facade of imperial power, in the hidden corners of Subura, a conspiracy was brewing, one capable of shaking the very foundations of authority. Young Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, a 16-year-old with imperial blood, became the victim of a betrayal committed by the person closest to him, his twin brother. A celebratory night turned into a nightmare of humiliation and disgrace for the heir to the Roman throne. History would remember him as Caracalla, an emperor who, having endured betrayal, would return to power to become one of the most ruthless and despotic rulers in history. We are about to discover how a brother, blinded by a lust for power, transformed the heir to the empire into a slave, and how this tragic experience ushered in an era of terror that would forever change the face of Rome. To understand the origins of this drama, one must return to the very heart of the Roman Empire in 204 AD. Rome was experiencing a period of prosperity under the wise rule of Emperor Septimius Severus, who had managed to consolidate his power after decades of civil wars. He dreamt of creating a stable dynasty that would ensure the hereditary transfer of power. Septimius had two twin sons, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, the elder, and Publius Septimius Geta. Both were born in Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, in France, and from an early age were prepared for governing the empire. However, despite their blood relation, their characters differed markedly. Marcus, as the elder, was impulsive, proud, and possessed military talent. The legions admired him, seeing in him a future military commander. Geta, by contrast, was characterized by his calculating nature, political acumen, and coolness. And although Roman law favored Marcus as the firstborn, Geta had no desire to remain in his brother's shadow. In those times, succession to the throne was not merely a family affair, but a complex struggle for power involving the Senate, the army, and the Roman elite. Every gesture, every act of favor from the emperor could shift the balance of power. In this tense atmosphere, the rivalry between the brothers escalated into something far more dangerous, a secret war for the imperial throne. In an atmosphere of powerful ambitions and universal distrust, Geta, driven by treacherous designs, made a decision that would radically alter the course of the empire, to eliminate Marcus while avoiding direct bloodshed. His plan was exceptionally cunning and intricate. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus had turned 16, and the imperial palace was preparing for a grand ceremony where, in the presence of the Senate and the legions, he was to be officially proclaimed heir to the throne. It seemed the young prince's fate was sealed, but in the shadows, Geta was hatching plans to ensure this triumphant day would never come to pass. Geta understood that directly murdering his brother would inevitably arouse suspicion in their father, the emperor. Therefore, he devised a more insidious plan to destroy Marcus not physically, but morally, to strip him of his dignity and tarnish his name so thoroughly that he would forever lose any claim to the throne. To execute this sinister scheme, Geta turned to Marcus Brutus Corbus, a man whose name struck terror throughout Rome, a slave trader, skilled in erasing identities and transforming nobles into anonymous commodities. On the eve of the solemn ceremony, Geta invited his brother to a private feast at his country villa. Marcus, naive and trusting, accepted the invitation, unaware that this banquet would be his last meal as a free prince. The wine served at the feast was laced with narcotics brought from distant Egypt, a silent poison that gradually dulled his senses and plunged him into unconsciousness. When Marcus lost consciousness, armed men stormed the villa. Within minutes, he was chained and secretly transported through a network of underground tunnels to the capital's darkest and most dangerous quarter, Subura. There, far from the luxury of the palaces, lay the empire's most squalid and inhuman slave market. For 3 days, Marcus lay unconscious in a dark cell. When he finally awoke, he was no longer the heir to the throne. His hair was dyed, his skin darkened with eastern pigments, and his body covered with false symbols to pass him off as a barbarian slave captured on the empire's borders. His name was erased from memory, his lineage forgotten. For Rome, Marcus was no longer a prince. He was merely an anonymous commodity, put up for sale. In the very heart of Rome's Subura, a dark drama unfolded, where the heir to a great empire was reduced to the status of a sex slave, stripped of his name and past. Subura's marketplace, usually bustling and crowded, was particularly fervent that day. Amidst the cries of traders and the cynical offers of pimps, a youth was displayed for all to see, in whom noble features could still be discerned, but who was already bound by the chains of slavery. None of those present could have guessed that before them stood Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, son of the emperor, heir to the Roman throne. For the paltry sum of 300 gold denarii, young Antoninus was sold to Gaius Valerius Maximus, the proprietor of Subura's most fashionable brothel. This was a place where, behind closed doors, the most intimate desires of the powerful were fulfilled. The 3-story brothel was a veritable factory of depravity. On the ground floor, clients were offered illustrated catalogs of merchandise. On the second, luxurious rooms filled with the aromas of oils and incense awaited. And on the third, like in a gilded cage, slaves awaited their turn. It was here that Marcus received a new name, Marcus Servus, supposedly a barbarian captured in the Germanic lands. He spent several days in solitary confinement, subsisting only on bread and water until his body and spirit were broken. Soon followed the first humiliation. An elderly senator desired him for his pleasure. What Marcus endured that night left an indelible mark on his soul, a wound that would never heal. However, instead of breaking, Marcus began to devise a strategy for survival. By day, he played the role of an obedient slave, silently fulfilling all demands. By night, alone in his cell, he reminded himself who he truly was, not Marcus Servus, but Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, heir to the Roman Empire. In this duality of identity, a new strength was born, to observe, to remember, and to wait. Each client became an open book to him. Marcus memorized names, faces, secrets confided in intimate settings, weaknesses hidden beneath a mask of pleasure. The most powerful men in Rome, unknowingly, were nurturing the man who would one day hold vengeance in his hands. Among the other slaves, Marcus found an ally, Claudia, an educated Greek woman who taught him how to endure humiliation while keeping his mind intact. It was she who helped him transform pain into a lesson and humiliation into strategic patience. Within the walls of the brothel, where corruption thrived, not merely a victim, but a future ruler was emerging, destined to shake the Roman Empire to its foundations. January 205 AD marked a turning point in Marcus's destiny. He had spent almost 10 months in captivity. His body bore the marks of endured humiliations, but his mind had acquired the sharpness of a blade. An unexpected visit from a high-ranking guest turned everything upside down. That evening, Marcus Aurelius Cleander, the all-powerful Praetorian prefect and Emperor Septimius Severus's right-hand man, appeared at the brothel. Seeking solitude and sensual pleasures, he was struck by the young slave named Marcus Servus. Despite his dyed hair, artificially altered skin color, and marks of abuse, Cleander unmistakably recognized in him facial features unique to the imperial family. This youth was not just a slave, but the lost heir to the Roman throne. Cleander immediately requested a private meeting, where Marcus, once alone, confirmed his identity by presenting scars known only to the closest members of the imperial family, and revealed intimate secrets of the Senate and the palace, providing irrefutable proof of his lineage. The Praetorian prefect realized that delay was akin to death. The revelation of this information threatened Rome with an unimaginable scandal, capable of plunging the empire into chaos. That very night, under the guise of a routine transaction, Cleander paid Valerius a sum that would not arouse suspicion. Officially, he was acquiring a new servant for his household, but in reality, he was saving the heir to the throne from inevitable doom. Marcus was secretly led through underground tunnels leading to the palace. At dawn, after almost a year spent in hell, he once again saw the magnificence of marble and gold that had once been the familiar surroundings of his home. The reunion with his father, Septimius Severus, was filled with conflicting emotions. The emperor, who had mourned his son, believing him dead or captured by barbarians, now embraced him, expressing his fury and pain. However, the joy of return was overshadowed by unspeakable horror. Marcus recounted in detail the circumstances of his abduction, naming senators, traitors, and military commanders involved in his humiliations, and divulged secrets extracted from the brothel's clients. It was a veritable catalogue of corruption and depravity, capable of dismantling the existing power structure. Septimius Severus instantly realized that his son had returned not merely as a victim, but as a deadly weapon. The naive boy he once was had vanished forever in the foul alleys of Subura. In his place emerged a cold, calculating, and immeasurably more dangerous personality. From this pivotal moment, father and son embarked on a meticulous plan for retribution. Their revenge was to rely not on the steel of blades, but on something far more formidable, comprehensive information, and terrifying fear. Following his return, Marcus carefully avoided public appearances, officially listed as missing. In secret, alongside his father, he began painstakingly to create something Rome had never seen before: an intricate underground network of power skillfully woven from blackmail, subtle manipulation, and paralyzing fear. Marcus possessed an undeniable advantage, unavailable to anyone else. He was privy to the most intimate secrets and confessions of high-ranking senators, influential traders, and powerful officers from a time when they believed him to be merely an anonymous and nameless slave, posing no threat. Secrets of corruption, political betrayals, illicit dealings, and treacherous conspiracies against the empire. All this compromising information was now concentrated in his hands, and Marcus perfectly understood how to turn this valuable trove of knowledge into the deadliest weapon. One by one, he began to secretly contact his former clients, whose secrets he held. His message was utterly simple and left no room for ambiguity. He knew all their secrets. He knew for a fact all their sins and vices, which they had confessed in the dark. They had only two paths: either swear absolute and unconditional loyalty to the future emperor, or face inevitable public exposure and a shameful execution for treason. The effect of his actions was instantaneous and astonishing. Senators who had previously despised Marcus and treated him with disdain were instantly transformed into his most zealous and devoted defenders. Military prefects who had mocked and humiliated him became his most loyal and efficient generals. Corrupt traitors whose consciences were stained by dirty dealings began to generously fund his plans, trembling with fear that their vile transgressions would be made public. All of Rome, unbeknownst to itself, began to revolve around the figure of the heir, who skillfully played his chess game in the shadows, remaining unseen. At the same time, Marcus actively worked on shaping his new public image. For the people and the Senate, an official version was concocted to explain his prolonged absence. He had supposedly been on a secret mission in distant eastern provinces, infiltrating barbarian tribes as a covert imperial spy. This was a convenient and plausible legend designed to conceal the truth and present his triumphant return to Rome as the comeback of a mysterious hero, hardened by harsh trials and ready for new exploits. But behind this meticulously crafted mask lay a far darker and more sinister reality. Marcus was no longer the naive and trusting youth whom Geta had once betrayed. He had transformed into a calculating, patient, and ruthless man who had learned from bitter experience that true power lay not in the might of legions or the decrees of the Senate, but in carefully guarded secrets capable of shattering even the strongest lives and reputations in an instant. While Rome rejoiced, celebrating his triumphant return, Marcus, like a seasoned strategist, subtly prepared a devastating blow of retribution against his brother. The chessboard of fate was set, and only the final decisive move remained. It was 207 AD. 3 long years had passed since that fateful night at the villa, when Geta had committed his perfidious betrayal against his twin brother. At first glance, to unsuspecting eyes, the twins once again resided under the same roof, displaying a superficial brotherhood in the palace. In public, they exchanged hypocritical embraces, shared lavish feasts, and bestowed forced smiles upon the Senate. Yet behind each of these friendly gestures lay a suffocating, uncomfortable truth. Marcus harbored the knowledge of Geta's betrayal in his heart, and Geta, in turn, lived in constant silent fear that the truth would someday emerge and bury him. Marcus waited patiently for the opportune moment, refusing to be rushed. He had realized that patience could be the most formidable weapon in his arsenal, and so, when he felt that all the threads of the intrigue were in his hands, he invited his brother on a hunt in the picturesque but perilous Alban forests. This fraternal outing into nature, away from the prying eyes of the palace and unwanted witnesses, seemed ideal. Geta, consumed by overconfidence, accepted the invitation without hesitation, just as Marcus himself had done years ago. On the first night, the brothers shared wine, reminiscing about days gone by. But on the second night, Marcus offered his brother a goblet containing the very same narcotic that had once been used against him. The circle of treachery was complete, Geta drank the potion, unaware of the impending danger. When he awoke, chained in a dark cave, he realized that history was repeating itself, but the roles had irrevocably reversed. Before him stood 3 henchmen of the original conspiracy: Corbus, the unscrupulous slave trader; Valerius, the owner of the infamous brothel; and Fabius, one of the pimps who had had a hand in selling Marcus into slavery. All were captives, humiliated and broken. Marcus appeared in the torchlight, his face contorted by pain and a thirst for revenge. He presented them with documents, confessions, and irrefutable evidence of Geta's misdeeds. There was no turning back. Denying the obvious was impossible. Marcus's sentence was as cruel as it was meticulously planned. Geta was to experience the very same fate his brother had endured. He would be sold into slavery, given a new name, and forced to serve the same clients who had once abused Marcus. Every humiliation would be scrupulously recorded, every tear a living testament to merciless justice. This would not be a swift execution, but a slow, methodical degradation from which there was no escape. For months, Geta endured the same hell that Marcus had once experienced, but unlike his brother, he lacked the spiritual fortitude. He broke, losing his identity, pride, and dignity. What was once a cunning and ambitious prince transformed into a pathetic, obedient shadow, incapable of resistance. Marcus had achieved his revenge, but observing his ruined brother, he began to feel an unexpected vacuum in his soul. He had won, but this victory had not returned anything he had irrevocably lost. However, the story did not end there. The demise of Emperor Septimius Severus marked the dawn of a new era, bringing Caracalla onto the political stage, an emperor whose reign would be marked by the same relentless cruelty with which he had exacted his revenge. Septimius Severus died in Iberacum, a city known today as York, located in Britain. After his death, the reins of the Roman Empire passed to his elder son, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, better known as Caracalla. The long-awaited moment had arrived. The imperial crown finally adorned his head, yet his ascent to the throne was overshadowed by the ominous shadows of the past. Geta, transformed into a pathetic shadow of his former self, was brought back to the palace to meet his tragic end. No trace remained of the ambitious youth who had once plotted treacherous schemes. He had become an insensate puppet, devoid of the ability to reason or comprehend events. Marcus watched him without a word. There was no longer any hint of the brother who had betrayed him, the rival who had challenged him. Before him stood only an empty shell. And in that moment, Caracalla understood the bitter truth. His revenge had been too destructive. He had destroyed his enemy. That was undeniable, but along with him, the sole reflection of his own existence. Geta's execution was carried out in deep secrecy. Official Rome never learned the truth. Rumors circulated of bandit attacks, wounds sustained in battle, and suppressed conspiracies. But the truth was that the brilliant youth destined for the imperial throne had been erased from the face of the earth, consumed by his brother's relentless justice. Caracalla remained alone on the throne, sole ruler of the empire, yet simultaneously a prisoner of an inner void that no earthly power could fill. On the day of his coronation, Caracalla felt no joy. He had won a cruel game, crushed his enemy, exacted his revenge. But looking within himself, he found that no trace remained of the naive youth he had once been. In his place, The Roman throne was crowned by a hardened, suspicious man, forever scarred by betrayal. Thus began the era of one of the most ruthless regimes in the annals of the Roman Empire. Emperor Caracalla, who had once learned the art of governing through fear, blood, and universal silence, was no longer the Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, the naive youth who dreamt of imperial grandeur. He had transformed into a man whose will had been hardened by humiliation, whose heart had been embittered by vengeance, and whose mind poisoned by distrust. His political doctrine was simple and terrifyingly effective. Any potential threat must be eliminated before it could manifest itself. Executions began immediately. Senators, military prefects, prominent traders, no one could feel safe. The slightest suspicious glance, a rumor of possible betrayal, or an incautiously uttered word was enough to sign one's death warrant. Rome, long accustomed to political intrigue, was shocked by this new level of pervasive fear. The emperor seemed to know absolutely everything, remembered every face, every secret, every confession he had gathered during his long months in Subura. An extensive network of informants, like an invisible swarm, enveloped the entire empire. There was not a single corner where Caracalla did not have his eyes and ears. Spies infiltrated the Senate, embedded themselves in the legions, scurried through markets, and even penetrated the homes of noble patricians. Paranoia became the cornerstone of state policy. Punishments were notably cruel and ostentatious. A senator who had dared to insult Marcus Servius many years prior was forced to publicly confess his guilt before his peers. Military prefects who had once scorned him were subjected to elaborate tortures, as if mirroring the suffering he himself had once endured. Influential merchants lost not only their vast fortunes, but also their entire families, who were executed as a warning to others. All of Rome realized Caracalla knew no forgiveness, and his justice was as personal as it was ruthless. However, his cruelty was not confined solely to personal enemies. Throughout his 6-year reign, Caracalla applied the same logic of suspicion and preemptive elimination to anyone he perceived as a threat. Approximately 50,000 people were executed during this period, a figure that far exceeded the numbers of many of his predecessors. The entire empire lived under the oppression of one undeniable truth: the emperor's will was law, and that law was written in blood. It seemed only one person retained any influence over him: his mother, Julia Domna. She alone could speak to him without fear, the only one who could sometimes calm his raging fury. But even she understood her son could never return to his former self. The naive and good-natured Marcus had died in Subura. All that remained was Caracalla, an emperor forged by betrayal and sustained by universal fear. Like any ruler whose power rests on fear, Caracalla did not escape an inevitable end. Amidst a military campaign in Mesopotamia, this emperor, whose hands had sent thousands of innocents to their deaths, seemed an untouchable embodiment of power. However, fate had other plans, striking at the most unexpected and brutal moment of his life. During a march with his army, Caracalla, having momentarily separated from his main guard to relieve himself by the roadside, found himself vulnerable. This fleeting weakness was seized upon by the Praetorian Julius Martialis, who crept up from behind and inflicted a fatal stab wound upon the emperor. The motive for this act was Martialis's personal tragedy. His brother had fallen victim to Caracalla's merciless order. The emperor, who had made mistrust the cornerstone of his power, died exactly as he had always feared, alone, betrayed, and a victim of the very violence he had spawned. Not a single legion came to their ruler's aid. Not one ally dared to defend him. Rome, exhausted by fear and hatred, turned its back on its tyrant. In his final moments, according to chroniclers, Caracalla was consumed by memories of his younger self, a 16-year-old, full of naivety and capable of genuine love for his twin brother, whom he himself had betrayed. Perhaps for the first time he realized that his thirst for revenge had transformed him into a monster, surpassing even his enemies in cruelty, and that in gaining boundless power he had lost something far more valuable, his humanity. Caracalla's body was cremated without significant honors. The empire continued its existence as if this man had never been. Yet the imprint of his cruelty remained forever in Rome's history, like an indelible scar, testifying to the dark pages of the past. Thus ended the earthly existence of Caracalla, an emperor who wielded unlimited power, yet could never break the unseen shackles of his tragic past. The life story of Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, known to history as Caracalla, represents one of the most sinister and ruthless chapters in the annals of the Roman Empire. A young heir, treacherously deceived by his own kin, reduced to the status of a slave, and subsequently elevated to the imperial throne, he ruled by instilling terror and sowing cruelty. However, beyond the bare facts, this chilling tale prompts a troubling question. To what extent can an insatiable thirst for revenge drive a person? Caracalla reached the heights he had dreamed of, reclaimed his lost right to the throne, ruthlessly dealt with his brother, and punished all who had ever dared to humiliate him. Yet, despite all his triumphs, he never found the freedom he craved. His tormented soul remained forever captive to the unbearable pain he desperately tried to erase from his memory. The longed-for justice he sought throughout his life ultimately became his harsh sentence. Perhaps this is the main lesson to be drawn from this dark history. Revenge promises longed-for relief and liberation from suffering, but in reality it proves to be merely a chain that binds us even more tightly to the past. In his frenzied pursuit to destroy his enemies, Caracalla ultimately destroyed himself, becoming a victim of his own malice and hatred. In a world where even the strongest blood ties can be severed by insatiable ambition and a lust for power, it is vital to remember sometimes the most lethal weapon is not the blade wielded by an enemy, but the one we forge ourselves in the depths of our hearts.